Gentlemen, a good morning, which it is for us, and anyone listening, whatever time of day it is, a welcome to it. And we appreciate you listening, and it fulfills the purpose of our talking. Not only are we doing this one to another, but we're doing it recognizing that if we have anything in common as beings, as humans, then we share that common nature. And to talk openly and honestly about how we're operating and how we're functioning and how we're dysfunctioning is something that I would suspect is of interest to many people, regardless of whether they think they're ready to listen. So your listening is an indication of your interest, and your interest is an indication, as far as I can tell, of a willingness to grow and look and consider and expand around ideas that can be tricky and difficult and challenging, largely because we don't tend to function honestly in society, is my guess. And we've done a lot to pretend that we aren't quite as good as we are, and we don't quite have as much as we have, to diminish our capacity rather than expand and extend our capacity to begin to include thoughts that include everyone, and thoughts that could be better for everyone rather than just the few we're able to harbor in our own little seeming world that we call our own, which isn't in fact the case, because we actually share the entirety of everything rather than the thoughts we have about what we think we have. So I welcome you on that note, and I know that you're with us, whether we know your face or your voice. We're happy to have you, and you're very much a part of this. Your responses out there, your reactions, are part of the communication that we're witnessing. They're part of everything that's happening right now. So witnessing what you're doing and watching what you think is one way of participating, and listening is a huge component of communication, because if people were just talking and nobody was listening, there would be no reason for that conversation at all. And I suspect ours is made purposeful by people who are listening. And I notice there's people in Japan and Reseda and Sherman Oaks and Canada and Nigeria, New York, New Jersey, Woodland Hills, Calabasas. As I'm going through my memory here, I watch the conversations, and it's fascinating to me to know that we now have the capacity to talk to the world from wherever we are all the time. While we've always been interconnected, this telepathic expression is a very profound opportunity to say hello and discuss things that might otherwise seem segregated or unique to a certain class or a group of individuals. And I would say if we're unique at all, we're unique as a collective of individuals rather than an individual distinct from the collective. Anyway, welcome, and welcome you guys. And I know Michael and I saw each other yesterday. Everett, we haven't talked for a little bit. I know that we ended last week with a couple of questions, which was, how do I stay in the zone, was Everett, and how can I be of maximum service, was Michael, if I got them right. So we can take that lead, or we can go anywhere you want, because we can go anywhere you want.
I mean, I'll say the maximum service stuff. You know, it's one. This has been awesome. You know, doing these last couple episodes with the two of you. You know, we've talked about this before, Everett. I really don't know. I mean, I know him much better now. And I'm grateful for that. And obviously you, Jack, for creating this space again. And, you know, the meetings that I get to sit in on Monday, coming back to the question of maximum service, it's something we talked about in the beginning, which is, you know, leading by example, and understanding, to me, you know, more so now, what am I doing? You know, what am I about? What are my values? What are my principles? There's a book I'm reading, and it kind of touches on the thoughts that I have where, you know, man, I wish I would have played basketball, or I could have started a company, or I could have got into all these things. And one of the chapters I just read, he just said, find something that you enjoy and focus on, because your thoughts are going to do everything else. Your thoughts are going to tell you that you didn't do this. Your thoughts are going to tell you that, oh man, look at Tom Brady retiring. I watched him come into the league. And it's like, that is not serving me at being my best version to be able to be of service to others in a way that it's fulfilling for me. And so this is part of that, learning a lot about the thought process and everybody sharing it's been very eye-opening, because I can sit and watch and listen and identify, not relate. That's something I've always done, is relate, and I want to be in their position and feel like they do. And no, it's different now for me, because I can just identify certain things that I've thought were normal in my mind, and just continuing to lead by example is the way I'm trying to be of service and, speak true to things I'm trying to accomplish.
Well, and in a sick irony, we've always been attractive. The problem is we've been attracting things that reflect the nature of diseased, unhealthy thinking that are unhealthy and diseased, and end up using those to confirm that the world's the problem rather than what we're thinking. And so that attraction's always been there. We've just discounted it, because to actually do those things and look at those things and keep doing those things makes absolutely no sense, because it's insane. So the tendency is to pretend it's not happening, and we're not doing it. And what's happening is the world's going crazy, and the world's imperfect, and the universe is screwed up in some way. And that's a pretty big leap, simply to try and excuse that we have nothing to do with it, when we're at the center of the thoughts that are conflicted. We're filled with doubt. We're filled with self-doubt and self-abuse and low self-esteem and low self-worth. And all those things are examples of what we're actually doing, while we're making believe it's the world and everyone in it that's the problem. And so we create a new impossibility to reflect the impossibility of our idea that it isn't us.
And I've lived that truth.
What's that?
I've lived that truth. I remember being stuck in the Facebook loop and being stuck in these political cycles and all these things that are being bombarded with me. And all of a sudden I'm owning it. I need to represent my side and pick a side, and not understanding that it really wasn't being present. I was arguing about something with someone dear and close to me, about something happening in Arkansas, which I've never even been nor have family. Like, how did I get there? But it was detrimental to my health. It was detrimental to my day. And I haven't watched sports in quite some time. I just kind of disconnected from it. And I was just thinking yesterday, I am a Niner fan, if you will. And they lost yesterday. And I just sat there as I'm having dinner with my wife and everything's fine. And I go, man, if I was invested this year and I watched that game, what would my emotions be like right now? Where would I be mentally? We lost. I'm a loser. I was wrong. Or if we won, I'd be excited. I did something. I never left my house yesterday. So we identify with it.
The ability to see the potential to disconnect is huge when you've thought all along the only thing you had was that connection. And I would say we're never really disconnecting from it. What we're disconnecting from are tendencies that have been repeated so long that they seem normal and inescapable, when in fact they've been choices the whole time. Starting to really just realize that we're causing our experience. We're if we have an investment, as Everett and I were talking about, if we have an investment in something, which I would suggest is any choice we make, it comes with an expectation, because we're not making the choice to get nothing back. We're making the choice to do something and accomplish something. And it may not happen immediately. It may take a matter of steps to get there. There's an investment, and that investment includes the potential of not getting that, realizing that investment. So the risk and the doubt and all that stuff is normal within the context of that. The chronic doubt and the chronic sense of fear is caused from underlying thoughts that I don't think I'm thinking, because I've taken for granted for so long that they're true and believable. I've been believing in them for so long. They're these fixed ideas. I don't even think I'm thinking about them anymore, while in fact I become numb to what I'm thinking, and making believe that because I'm numb, it isn't happening, and wondering why now the world's the problem, rather than just start to admit a lot of what is impacting me is what I don't think I'm even doing.
Well,
admit that if I'm experiencing the doubt and the fear and all that it is in fact that I'm the primary cause of it. And it isn't to suggest there aren't other issues in the world, but those issues are immediate. They're not chronic. They're not things dragging along with me. They're things I can deal with in the present, which is a much different potential than constantly, chronically maintaining thinking about things in ways that aren't true for years and years and years and years, suffering from that and making believe that it becomes my nature, when in fact it's unnatural to be doing it and it's unhealthy to be doing it.
Can I pose a question? Because the thing I'm starting to understand is I can't allow the limit of my own thought be my reality.
Like you can
Jack's going to say you can.
But
think it is.
But exactly. But it's because I'm starting to push that wall. I'm starting to see, oh wait, that idea is just limited by my thought. That's it.
So is the wall. So is the idea you can push the wall created by the thought that you can't push the wall.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, how do you identify? How do you understand when you get to that space that you're limiting yourself by your own thought?
The conflict, the same doubt that causes you to ask a question. Questions aren't asked because of certainty. Questions are asked because of doubt. Mm-hmm. And if you think about what we think about, largely we're trying to answer questions. Mm-hmm. And why would we be perpetually questioning things if we knew things and we knew that there was a resolution to them? And I would suggest it's because we're constantly thinking about them in ways that they're not, and then question them as though they're questionable when what's questionable is how we're thinking. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. In you saying that, I just sit here and go, I don't question my driving ever. I think I'm one of the best drivers I've ever experienced. And that's just never a thought that comes into my mind.
But when you get into an accident, you will.
Sure, when that happens.
But the idea is that it's because it hasn't happened, it won't. And then what I'm doing becomes unquestionable, when I would suggest driving is one of the riskiest things we all do and pretend there's nothing to fear. And why is it that we can do that with driving? And yet when it comes to our own experience, we're constantly creating this chronic fear to the degree, we're constantly doing it to the degree that we're maintaining any thoughts that aren't true. And then think the best thing we can do is dismiss it and try to feel better about it, which ends up promoting the thinking as being right when it is the feeling and the effect that we're claiming to be wrong. Rather than seeing the effect and the consequence in our experience as being indicative of what we're doing in thought, addiction treats the symptom, the feeling. It says, well, all I need to do is feel better. So what do? I work out, I run 50 miles, run. I never get away from it. I get away with it as I run, it goes with me, but I exhaust my ability to think by having my body consume the blood and the oxygen, and all of a sudden I feel better. And endorphins are released because I'm not focused on thinking. I'm thinking, how do I get my body to continue to function at this level of work that I'm doing? And those are escape valves, chances to think we can escape, when in fact, if we're not actually looking at the source of it, we're actually creating stress that we're trying to run from, and the body's now stressed running, and we're stressing it twice, and it starts to have an impact on it that goes well beyond the benefits that could come from it. And I have a friend who had a heart attack in her 30s trying to become an athlete.
In her 30s, wow.
By pushing it too hard. And I'm not suggesting that is common to all, but people get bad knees, they get bad backs, they run themselves into the ground literally, thinking that because they feel better, that's a solution. And I'm not suggesting that's not a viable option. It is. But if we're treating the feeling, we're going to do things to try to fix the feeling that are corrupt because we're trying to avoid the thinking. We're trying to avoid the source of the feeling, rather than simply concede that the feeling in your experience, you were asking, how do I deal with this? You start to notice that where there's conflict, you're doing something, you're up to something. Mm-hmm. If you feel that anguish inside, you just say, I'm up to something. You don't have to go any further than that to be accurate. Think about that. If you say I'm up to something and you're up to something, you're accurate about what's happening. You're starting to speak honestly about what's happening. If you say to yourself, how is this happening again? Why is this happening again? You're asking the same insane thinking that's creating it to answer the question as to why it's doing what it's doing. And that's just more insanity laden on top of the already existing. It's a new layer of spinning and spinning and spinning at a vicious cycle. rather than say, I'm up to something. You don't need to know any more than that to have a relationship to it that's at peace and accurate. And you will start seeing and witnessing what it is you're doing in ways that you would never be able to brutalize yourself into admitting. So if the questions are coming, they're coming from doubt. And if you have doubt, I would suggest you're thinking something that's doubtful.
Yeah, and as I mentioned when we were speaking earlier, even with my wife, she's noticing I'm much more still lately. And it's because I've done a better job of identifying when I just need to be still, and I don't need to be stuck in thought, and I don't need to be analyzing the day, and I don't need to be doing things. And she's even asked, are you okay? Like, is everything? Because I'm not answering her question. I'm not speaking over her. I'm not interrupting. I'm not bringing up something that's irrelevant to what we're actually doing at the moment. And it's just being still.
I'm a lot more still too.
Huh.
I notice that, and I celebrate it being still more. It's like an exhale.
Well, and to your question, how do I stay in the zone? That zone never changed, and you've always had that. It's always been there. The chronic nature of being preoccupied with thinking gives us impressions that are not true. And one of the impressions is that what's happening isn't happening because all we think is happening is what we think. And the distinction between knowing and thinking is that knowing never thinks, because it's an absolute, ever-present, quiet state of being. It's at perfect peace all the time. If that's the nature of nature, then it doesn't all of a sudden come and go. We don't lose it and we can't find it. It's just ever present. What you're beginning to witness when you're not doing what you normally would be doing with chronic obsessive thinking is starting to notice things that would normally not be apparent to you because of the preoccupation of being consumed in thought. And think about consumption in thought as the same thing as drinking or doing a drug. It's consumption.
Before I would have called that being present.
Here we're looking at the absolute nature of presence as being always present because it can't be anything else, and starting to see that things that are absolute can't be extinguished. They can't be eliminated. They can't be discounted. They can't be here and not there, not everywhere. They can't be somewhere else ever, but we can think they are. And it helps clarify the difference between thinking. When thinking is seen as something we're doing and choosing, it becomes a much easier thing to begin to stop doing than when we think our life depends on continuing to do it, because the life we're thinking about is only the thoughts we have about who we think we are, which is ego. So we're allergic to the concept of a lie, and we're allergic to the concept of ego. And what does allergy have us do? But exactly the opposite of what we would normally do. An allergy is an abnormal response to something. And the normal response to something that's wrong is to stop doing it. The abnormal response is to do more of it to fix it. That's addiction. And within the confines of the description of the allergy to alcohol, the idea that drinking more is the solution has people go for decades thinking that more and more drinking without even noticing that it's slowly, what used to be a pint is now a fifth and then a quart and then 2 quarts. Just slowly, because you can't, if one level is satisfying and yet the problem continues, you need a new level to confront the numbness and to maintain the numbness, to try to overcome the awareness that that thing hasn't gone away. That problem never left. The thing that started it didn't leave if we're continuing to maintain the thought and treat the symptom. And in the big book, it says that the drinking is a symptom. The bottle is a symbol. It's telling us that the cause is mental. The cause is self-centeredness. The cause is ideas about who we think we are. They're centered in the mind. And if that's the center of addiction, that's something humans have been doing, not something alcoholics have been doing and drug addicts have been doing and gamblers have been doing and sex addicts have been doing and food addicts have been doing. It's something humans have been doing. So most of our functions have been dysfunctional in many ways. And I would say that we live on a planet that's beginning to reckon with those things and look at those things a little differently and start to actually say, well, maybe what we've been doing has been the cause. And maybe if we stopped doing it, things would get better. And nature, typically left alone, heals, interestingly. Because it's natural. It knows what to do, just like our bodies know what to do when we stop polluting them with toxic waste, including the thinking we do and the stress that creates out of the chemicals that are released and used up for emergencies that aren't even happening. And we wonder why we're depleted in chemicals that are natural for our experience of well-being. So that stillness you're noticing is really the present awareness you've always had. You were just busy, preoccupied. It's kind of like if you decided to lay on a skateboard and travel the world, you wouldn't see as much as if you were standing upright and looking outward. You'd see a lot of ground. You might cover a lot of ground, but that's exactly what you'd be doing, is covering ground and not really seeing what's above you. Same with putting your hand in front of your face and thinking the world's just, filled with fingers, which, given a lot of reactions, could be true or accurate.
Mm-hmm.
So that present state, if it's present, I know in our Sunday discussions, when we started, there was a lot of conflict and a lot of people opposing the ideas and standing up for what they thought was right and their truth and all that kind of stuff. But eventually, as people started considering this, the whole group, the 10 or 12, however many people were there listening, would just get quiet. Every single person would just stop. And it still happens. There's those gaps where there's a minute or two where everybody just listens. And everybody I know is just contemplating. They're starting to think. They're starting to actually employ thinking in the way it's designed, which is to imagine possibilities and consider things broader than the narrow focus of ideas we think we have to continue to fight for. And we have to think about human progress as always seems to be based on a fight. Why, if it ever worked, would we still be fighting over stuff? It doesn't work. Fights cause fights. If we fight ourselves internally, all we do is learn to fight better and make believe that denial and defense and delusion and defiance is the winning formula of life, when in fact it gets us better at actually doing things that conflict with our environment rather than concede to our environment and include our environment. We become exclusive rather than inclusive in our activities.
Yeah, when I listen back to the podcast, I'm always conscious of the pauses. Just, it's more obvious to me now why those things are occurring, because of everything you just said and everything Everett just said. It's I can identify when I'm still, because it happens less likely than when I'm in thought, or often, I should say.
Well, and I think you mentioned Anna picked up on that stillness, and it was a little awkward for her because there's nothing. That interactive component seems to just it's vacant and almost leads to her being more quiet, because there isn't that sort of energy in the air that seems to need to constantly talk and go back and forth about, well, my thoughts and your thoughts and my thoughts and your thoughts and my thought. All of a sudden, there's just a presence, and that awareness is recognizing that that's everyone's state of being, everyone and everything. By the way, all things also are infused with whatever that thing is. They're all doing what they're doing perfectly. The difference with things we call inanimate is they're not thinking about themselves. They don't have a self to think about, just like an absolute source is knowing because it doesn't think of itself. It doesn't have an ego. It doesn't have an image of itself because it doesn't think. It just is. It just knows it knows, because it doesn't question whether it knows, because there wouldn't be any question about it. So there is no doubt in that. And that, if that's our nature, that's a knowing nature that is very quiet and very current and very still. And the words current and still mean it's always happening. It could be a current like the current in a river, but as it moves, it's always present in its movement. And that would suggest this present state in time is something moving through time, but in fact, it's always just simply present as time, which equals change. Time is about things changing. As things change, they're always current and they're always still, and they're still right now. presently. They're the sum total of everything that's ever happened, and that's what the present is. So if you're looking for the past to fix something, it's in your present. And if there's anything that can be done about it, it's what you can do now. And if you're of maximum service, and that's always been the case, then beginning to express that would align you with that case. It wouldn't make that case any greater or less than it's always been. It would just begin to align you with thoughtful expression of that and allow that expression to begin to ease other people's life rather than add the anxiety and stress that seems to create the reactiveness that we are also commonly witnessing in ourselves and each other. It's not necessary, it's a choice.
I just had a kind of epiphany of, and with the metaphor of riding a bicycle, that that when you're on a bicycle, this goes to, whether when you have doubt, doubt is a representation of fear. And if you focus on the doubt, there's less chance of being able to reach your objective than if you're focusing on how to accomplish your objective. That when you're on a bicycle, you have to keep your balance, and you have to also keep moving, right? Because sure, you can you can put your feet on the ground and then stand on your bicycle, but once you start bicycling, now you have to keep moving. So that's like time. And if you look at an obstacle that you're approaching on the bicycle, and if all you do is stare at the obstacle, you're going to hit the obstacle, versus looking at where you want to go and focusing on where you want to go and how to get there. Do you know what I mean? It's like when you're driving in a car. Also, if you're driving in a car and you see something in front of you that you need to get around, if all you're doing is staring at that thing, you're going to drive right into that thing. Mm-hmm. But if you have to actually look past the thing and around and imagine how that's going to be, what that path is going to be. You might not even be able to see around the bend, but you're getting ready at the first opportunity to position yourself in the turn that you're going to take that, but you're not looking at the part of the turn that if you don't judge your turn correctly, you're going to end up hitting.
I think in driver's ed, Everett, they tell you to look 100, 150 feet down the road. And people who look closer tend to miss. They're very shaky in the turns and all that because they're not getting that perspective. So, and on a bike, just like walking, we're largely out of control. We're out of balance. We're largely out of balance, but we're within control to be able to correct the balance. And I would say that's a better expression of living than thinking we need to be dead center all the time without variation, when in fact what's happening is constantly varying from what we expect in some degree. Because there's no way, if all that's happening is happening and everybody's participating in all that's happening, why would it be that we should be able to expect exactly the conditions that we're going to confront when we go out into our day, rather than begin to say, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And if I'm ready to deal with what happens, it's a lot better than being consumed with the thought that all that should happen is what I think should happen. And then all of a sudden be conflicting with everything that is happening, which is actually the only thing that's happening, rather than my thoughts about what I think should be happening. And that simple issue is a major conflict in thought. When I'm thinking that what's happening shouldn't be happening, by the way, it's happening. While it's happening, I'm thinking it shouldn't be happening. And what I'm thinking should be happening is something that isn't happening. And where I am isn't where I should be and wouldn't be if it weren't for something else that didn't happen. That is just mania being asked to develop into more mania and more craziness. And part of the issue that I was addressing a few minutes ago, this idea of the absolute nature, is that absolute nature never changes. It can't. It doesn't function in time and space. It isn't an essence that is essential to the relative experience we're having. It's essential to that relative experience in that it allows that relative experience to happen, but it isn't there manipulating the pieces, because it's like the idea that everything changing is always changing. The one thing that isn't changing is that everything's changing.
Right.
And that would be more indicative of an absolute state, because you're starting to see everything at one time rather than the bits and pieces. So when I'm managing the bits and pieces, I'm investing myself in the potential of making believe that's all that's happening is what I'm thinking about, when in fact, beyond all I'm thinking is still the rest of everything that's happening. And that may seem preposterous to even bother to consider, but to make believe that all that's happening is what I'm focusing on in that narrow way is to discount all the potential that could benefit me from all the other things that are happening that I'm not thinking about. And what's really preposterous is thinking that all the rest of that isn't happening because I'm not thinking about it. How this plays out in addiction is that we tend to treat symptoms. So if you go to the doctor and have blotches on your face and he gives you cream and they go away, and you stop using the cream and they come back, that's treating a symptom. Gives you the impression things are better, but it isn't getting to the cause. And so we spent, and I think we talked about it last time, a month, 6 weeks, 2 months, I don't even remember how much time, talking about the Teeter totter. And the fact that nobody ever comes to me and says, I really am working to feel worse. Can you help me? Never heard anybody say that. I want to be worse. I need help. Everybody always comes and says, I want to feel better. I want to find my true self. I want to be honest. I want to straighten my life out. I want, all those things. My question is, why is it that we constantly focus on thinking positively and not notice that to constantly have to think positively is an admission that we're thinking a lot of negative thoughts that we don't even think we're thinking, and we think we can overcome them by simply sandbagging the other extreme and starting to put some weight on it and bring balance to it, rather than say, what is it that I'm out of balance on that constantly has me wanting to get to the center, constantly has me feeling that I need to find my center, need to find my balance? Why am I imbalanced to begin with? So all of those things we can do to feel better, help us feel better, certainly, and there's nothing wrong with them. Nothing. But if we're using them exclusively to justify we're better and not dealing with the issue that has us feeling worse, all we're doing is setting ourselves up at some point, just like the drink, having to increase the level of what we're doing to feel better. And pretty soon it's just unsustainable, because eventually we realize that thing's been getting worse the whole time. And it's going to catch up with us. And the day's going to come when all of a sudden we don't seem to have any defensive against it, just like the big book talks about not having the defense against the drink. If we're entertaining the thoughts that cause the problem and continuing to maintain them by treating the symptom, those thoughts are getting better and better and better, and they're growing and growing and growing, just like any disease would. If you had severe stomach aches and didn't go to the doctor and said, I'm just going to think I don't have a stomach ache, and I'm going to think positively, and I'm going to do more, I'm going to run more, or I'm going to exercise more, I'm going to take a deep breathing class.
See, that what you're talking about is something, and someone mentioned it yesterday too, but it's, I lived that way. I thought, my stomach issues were normal. I thought my sleep patterns and me not being able to sleep, it's just what it was. It's part of life and just aging. I think that's a narrative that a lot of humans have just accepted, thinking that things just keep getting crappier as you age. And my journey through identifying that was when I stopped drinking for a month. I said, I'm just going to do 30 days. And within those 30 days, my sleep got a little bit better. I stopped sweating. My stomach felt better. And I thought, oh, cool. This is working out well for me. Maybe I can go have a drink now. And sure enough, I had a drink 3 months later, and I haven't drank since, because everything came back like a tornado. Couldn't sleep that night. Stomach was bothering me. Everything just happened. But how do you, without experiencing what I did, how does someone else identify that it's not the aging, it's the choices that they've been making that are compounding, like you just mentioned?
Well, and you suggested that everything came back, and I would suggest it never left. The ability we have to be deceptive about what's happening is the ability we have to think that what's happening isn't happening. And because we're not thinking about it, it's not happening. And that's like looking to your left and saying your right hand has disappeared. And you no longer have a right arm. So I can't sign anything. I can't sign checks. I can't do anything. Or looking to the right and saying my left arm, I can't pick anything up with my left arm. It doesn't exist anymore because I'm not looking. And that's a pretty infantile attempt to make believe that simply because we're not looking, it's not there. And the ultimate concession is to begin to say that if it's always there and I'm not looking, that's a pretty juvenile role to be playing. And it doesn't make as much sense when you start looking at it accurately as it does when you pretend you're not even doing it. And to make sense of things by going numb, we're sentient beings. We're designed to sense things. Our senses are designed to give us information about our environment so that we can gauge our environment and to know better about what to do and what to wear. If we walked out into freezing temperatures thinking it was 85 degrees, the chances are we would not last very long. And if we weren't sensing things and we were numb to them, we wouldn't even be listening to the sensations that would be telling us that something's wrong, that there's something here that can be addressed. And that's largely how we walk through life. When we're doing those things in mentally obsessive thinking, we're trying to make believe that insensitivity is the goal. So we can say, yeah, I'm great. When in fact, it's like holding a beach ball under the water in the ocean. And you wonder why you can't swim and can't enjoy the beach. And the kids are all looking for the ball. And you're busy trying to pretend it isn't there because it's beneath the surface. And to walk through life that way, we say things, if you begin listening to what you say, and I, remember when I first suggested everybody, they watch their words, and it took about 3 weeks for everybody to realize that I wasn't censoring them. I wasn't asking them not to say things. I was asking them to simply watch their words. And if you think of the connotation of that term, it's generally don't say that. And I'm suggesting just simply listen to what you say and ask yourself if it is in fact possible that it's true. And start to see that we say a lot of things that don't add up. Like the problems rush back in is a good example of it. When we start seeing it, we think they're rushing back in because we're still under the opinion that when we're not looking, they're not there. So those are all narratives that develop and people use, and they talk about feeling better and all that stuff. But if we're constantly talking about feeling better and nobody's striving to get worse, it's probably because we're doing things that are very negative and worse that we're not admitting, that has us compelled to feel better. And addiction is largely trying to feel better about something that's worse.
There is somebody you may know, I forget his name though. He went and lived in India for a while, and he saw this young girl with her father, and she was playing with a python, and just absolutely with no fear whatsoever. And he was really mesmerized by this because this python, if it spits at you, it'll kill you. And he asked the father, what is, how is she able to do this? And the father said, because she has no her thoughts, or again, I'm just reiterating the story from the gentleman, but he said that the thought, she has no fear. She has no bad thoughts. And I've always, after hearing the story, I always thought about if that's accurate, like what type of experience would it be to be in that place of the way a baby just trusts until it learns not to trust. or a baby, a child, to be in that mental state. I really appreciate what you said earlier about focusing on or trusting that everything is happening, and this is now my interpretation, that everything's happening as it should be happening, and to embrace that. And when you embrace that, then that fear kind of dissipates.
Well, and the real freedom, Everett, comes from recognizing that your embrace is irrelevant, because what's happening is happening whether you think it is or not. And that's the beginning of seeing something absolute as absolute, rather than something, again, conditional that's based on what we do to get there. When we think it's up to us, all we want is credit. When we thank whatever that thing is for doing exactly what it's doing, or I would even say better, when you begin to concede that it's doing what it's doing, regardless of whether we embrace it, then you begin to see the freedom we're choosing in acting as though it's not doing what it's doing. And it becomes very easy to say, well, that doesn't make any sense, and letting it go and stopping and saying, look, it's doing what it's doing regardless of what I think. And it doesn't require my embracing of it at all. And now you've got freedom, because there is nothing you need to do. And you've made the concession that it's always happening, and it's already happening, and it's always been happening, and it's how it's been during the whole time you were delusionally imagining that it wasn't. And you start to get a clear picture of the thinking, its impact on our experience, and how we use it to make believe that it's all that's happening when it's all we think about. And there's the real freedom. The real freedom is recognizing that a teeter-totter, if we're trying to bring it back into balance, is always on solid ground to be in or out of balance. To be teetering and tottering, it has to be on solid ground. Otherwise, it wouldn't matter that it was teetering or tottering. It would be flipping and turning and spinning, and there would be no way to balance on it or bring it into balance. It would just be a constant state of movement, upside down, inside out, just moving. And starting to see that zone you're talking about is something that we're always in. And the impact of our thinking when we feel disconnected and out of balance, we're literally accurately assessing what we're thinking, not our state of being.
Mm-hmm.
And we mistake how we feel.
What's happening?
Well, we mistake how we feel as something to change when we don't want to admit it's reflecting the thinking. We want to think of it as an occurrence that's happening to us rather than being caused by us. So what do? Try to fix the feeling. Try to escape the feeling. Compulsions are trying to outrun the feeling because the feeling is unbearable to us. And why it is unbearable? Because we absolutely know better. And what do we know? That the absolute nature does not change no matter what we think, and that thinking is not the source of the absolute nature. Thinking is a byproduct of that absolute source. So what did when we think thinking is everything? Out of order. How do we act? Out of order. What do we create? Disorders. We talk about it openly, but don't look at the words and say, oh, these are telling me I'm thinking thinking is first. I'm thinking thinking is primary. I'm thinking thinking is the only thing I need to do to straighten things out, while I'm using the sick thinking that's causing the problems that are twisted, and then asking it to give me more and more and more and more, because I'll finally straighten the thing out. And all I'm doing is creating a piece of yarn or knotting a piece of yarn that just gets thicker and thicker and more convoluted. And if you've ever seen a piece of yarn or rope twisted, it eventually just becomes a gnarled pretzel in 30 different, circular motions. It just becomes something that's unusable as a rope.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really beginning to concede. Even surrendering is a word that suggests there's been a fight. But if the thing we've been imagining doesn't even exist except to what we're imagining, we claim it's a fight to claim there was something to even justify what we were doing, when there was no justification at all, except our willingness to claim it was a fight to even suggest there was something there to fight. All it was it was an imagination.
We didn't even have an opponent.
Exactly. So it's not even a surrender, it's a concession. It's simply saying, oh, it wasn't there. Like you were talking about the wall, Michael. You have to imagine the wall being there, But if you think of a wall and start pushing it and blame the wall for pushing back because it's resisting what you're doing, you're creating the resistance to give you the impression that it's the wall doing it rather than what you're doing to the wall.
That it was created by me.
Yeah, you're creating it. And if you thought you were going to stand in front of the wall until it concedes and fight it, you got a long way to go, and you're not going to be very useful with your hands until that's over. And that example is sort of a visual that seems preposterous. Obviously, that seems absolutely stupid and ridiculous because it's stupid and ridiculous. And yet we do it in our brains, making believe that these images we create about things that are obstructable and impenetrable and dense and imperfect and impossible are real and true when they're only just constructs of thought. Because an absolute nature isn't impossible. It's the source of all possibility. That's our source. And I don't have to think positively about that to make that our source. It's my source regardless of what I think. Now I can begin to choose wrong and absolutely recognize, something's wrong about this. I can feel the doubt. I can feel the uncertainty. There's something wrong. What is, I can look and see, and I can continue on that path, but I'm no longer acting blind to it because I'm beginning to witness it, and I will correct sooner than later. I don't have to get down to the end of the dead end to find out that the sign I saw at the beginning of the block that said dead end was in fact an accurate assessment of what to expect. I've got that sensation now, and I'm starting to utilize my body's capacity to feel and to function accurately about what's happening, rather than pretending putting it to sleep is my best goal to have it not feel what's going on, because I don't like all the feelings I feel and think that all I should ever get is chocolate when I don't like vanilla. That's pretty infantile. Rather than say, if I feel bad, something's bad about what I'm thinking. It's not bad. My life isn't bad. The world isn't bad. All people aren't bad. My thinking's bad. That's my first line of action that I'm taking that's impacting my experience. First line.
I'm up to something.
Yeah. Well, that's the word I use, the statement I use, because it's the look in my mother's eyes that I used to see. She wouldn't say anything, but she'd just look at me. And she knew I was up to something. She just knew it. And she was right. And my sense is that sense we have is not an accident. It's not a curse. It's not a strange, odd coincidence. It's a coincidence, an action that's happening, coinciding with the incidences that I'm creating in thought. My thoughts are choices. The content of my thinking may not be a choice, but the content of my thoughts are a choice. And when I'm discontent, I'm thinking thoughts that are empty, thoughtless, have no basis. And why do I feel bored? I'm sick and tired of entertaining things that don't exist and trying to make believe they're everything, rather than witness everything's already everything. And it's very entertaining and very engaging and very interesting when I'm willing to actually look at it, which includes everyone and everything. And all of a sudden I become fascinated and exploring. I'm an explorer, like the guys who traveled the oceans that didn't know what they were going to find. We have that potential all the time. It is our nature to be in that realm, to look that way. Now, I would say, Michael, that's attractive to people. Why? Because it's how we're designed to grow, develop, figure out better ways to utilize what we have so that we have more to give. Not to give it all away so we have nothing left. You know, in AA, there's 3 suggestions. Trust God, number 1, which is basically not my thinking. The limits of that power that we call God is simply, it isn't your thinking, it isn't who you think you are, it isn't you in that regard, period. So as long as it's not you, you've got something bigger than you, higher power. Trust God. Why? Because that power would be trustworthy compared to the lack of trust I create in relying on my own self-centered, limited ideas. Next thing is clean house. What does that mean? Look at what I'm doing. Look at the essence of who I think I am and start cleaning that up so I can start reflecting who I actually am rather than who I think I am. So it's the beginning of starting to bring light to ego, and the darkness of ego is always disappears, like all darkness always disappears whenever light's introduced. So it's starting to look at it, to be accountable. It doesn't say, I can't have defects and I can't have shortcomings and I can't do things wrong. It simply says, when you're doing it, admit it. Begin to recognize what you're doing as what you're doing, rather than what you make believe you're doing to make believe you're not doing what you're doing. That's the difference between cleaning a house. Now my house is clean because the light's on and I can see where the mess is and I know how to clean it up. Doesn't mean I'm never going to make a mess. It means that I'm ready and prepared to just clean them up as they come. Last thing in that series is serve others. So what do I watch a lot of people do? Constantly be in service while their life is a mess. What are they passing on? Not the solution, but the problem. They're treating the symptom. They're not treating the cause. They're not looking honestly enough at what's going on and preserving their right to clean house before they invite anybody into that house and start sharing it with people.
Mm-hmm.
And a dirty, filthy environment tends to breed bacteria and all kinds of other toxic waste that is not good for people. So I don't think it's an accident it's presented that way, nor do I think a daily basis of our actual attractiveness is attractive when we're doing everything we can for everybody else, but bankrupting our own existence and life and have less and less to give. Because we're not doing anything productive. We're just helping others, helping others, helping others, helping others. And what we're really helping ourselves to is the idea that we're a really big help while we're not actually carrying a message that is healthy and that isn't diseased. And I'm not condemning anybody for what they do. They can do whatever they want. Everybody can do what they want. I'm simply suggesting that within the confines of what we're asked to do it in a certain prescribed method for good reason. Not accidentally, not to be put out of order once again, but actually look at the order and say, oh, that's interesting that it would be told to us in that order. Why do we trust God? God's trustworthy. Why? It's never not doing what it's doing. It's always giving everything it has. It's always available. It's always in reach. It's always accessible. However you define it, doesn't matter what the word is. God has gotten a bad reputation because we think of God as something that doesn't do for us what we're unwilling to stop doing to ourselves. So why not blame God and just walk around like, oh, well, I'm just condemned and cursed because God just can't seem to come through for me. It's a pretty sick approach to simply avoiding what I'm doing. And if I've been given the freedom, that's what God gave me. That's what came from that source, is the freedom to do whatever I want. And when I begin to recognize it, I begin to say, I've been doing this all along voluntarily. I've never been condemned by it other than the thoughts I had about it to excuse that I shouldn't be held responsible for what I'm doing, when in fact I was responsible the whole time. I was always present. I was always knowing. I was pretending I wasn't. I was acting out of order and suffering disorders at the same time: anxiety, stress, neurosis, reactiveness, impulsiveness, compulsiveness, all witnesses. Real time, as though time is fake, present time witnesses to what's actually happening are those things. Reactiveness is one of them. If I'm reacting, I'm defending something that's weak. There's no defense in an absolute source. There's no need. There's no saving in an absolute source because there's nothing that can be lost. There's no finding. There's no seeking. It can't be lost. It can't be unfound. It can't even be found because it's always present. All that's lost is my thoughts. All that's missing is content. All that I'm lacking is substance in those thoughts, because they're empty images attempting to pose as reality and life and truth. And it's basically all made up. It's ego. And ego's not hard to let go of. It's hard to maintain. There's another lie. We think life is hard. Life isn't hard. Life's easy. Life couldn't be easier. It's what we think of it and do in relation to it that's hard, that doesn't align with it, that's malaligned to it. That's what's hard. We are built on a platform of responsibility, just like we are built to be present. where everything is happening. Where else could we possibly be if everything that's happening right now is happening? Where else is there to be? Nowhere. So to think we've got to get somewhere and have something to do and need something isn't true, but they're all things we can do. And when we're free, we can say, yeah, I'd love to drive a Rolls Royce. They're really smooth. I might not like paying the insurance on the thing, but I could do that. Why not? And yet it may not be my top priority at that point, because the value ultimately is in the connection, the interaction, and the potential of realizing this in everyone else. And I would say, Michael, that that's the attractiveness. That service, being of maximum service, is beginning to realize that when we are fully realized by actually realizing what's happening, which would be self-actualization and self-realization with a capital S, not a small s, is the beginning of actually having something that everyone not only wants, but something everybody already has and has thought they didn't have. And what they're interested in is finding out how you got it. And when you remind them they already have it, it's a lot easier for them to say, oh, I've gone a long way trying to make believe I didn't. It's a lot easier to let go of than try to train somebody to come up to the infinite absolute nature. To just say, well, you can't be away from it. You can't be apart from it. You haven't ever been apart from it. It's impossible. We're of it. It's not up to thinking to get us there. That's what we are. That's what gives thinking the potential to have the freedom to make believe that it isn't part of it.
It's also the message, though. Like I keep thinking of the teeter-totter you mentioned, because I saw an exchange. And it didn't sit with me well. And I didn't know why until we were talking right now. But I was at the grocery store, gentleman who's standing there. You can tell he's been working probably 15 hours. He actually said he'd been working 16 hours. He's exhausted, doing his thing. And he didn't have any expression. He was emotionless, if you will. He just looked exhausted. And I was just present, waiting for my stuff, nothing out of the ordinary. And a woman came up and asked him a question and then was like, smile. And he just was like, what? She goes, smile, be happy. I tell my son all the time, you just need to be in a good mood. And I'm listening to her and I'm like, whoa. And now that you mentioned what you mentioned about the teeter-totter, it was a clear picture of this woman who believed, or person, it doesn't really matter if it's male or woman, but it's a person that believed that constantly being happy was the solution. You need to constantly be positive. And this other gentleman who's just exhausted and tired doesn't want to do much of anything. And I'm standing in the middle of these two. I just left it be. There was nothing for me to
clearly
add to
she
it.
wasn't happy with him not expressing what happiness. So it's, we think that the apple falls from the tree, but in the tree of knowledge, there are no apples. It's all knowledge. There probably wasn't an apple to eat. And the figment of imagination that we use to cover up what we're doing it's transparent, it's translucent. It has no density to it. It's just imagined to have it so that we can support the contentions that we're each doing.
Yeah, and that's that force feeding, of that other side. Like, why are you so positive, or why are you so negative? Like it's no one really does talk about that balance you're referring to.
Well, I believe it's talked about, but I say those things in more general terms than is probably accurate, because there are conversations that are emerging, and most of them, in my experience, like the things I listen to, what would typically be considered self-help, is helping people to get better at the self that isn't really who they are. So it's a trying to actually manage the ego and make the ego better, when in fact the whole concept of it doesn't exist other than in thought. And the beauty of that is that we can always come up with characters to be and act out in. We can always act out as anything we want. We can always put on a mask. We can always masquerade as the head of the circus. And, we could do anything we want in that regard. And the freedom to do that is a lot different than the condemnation of thinking we need to maintain a self that doesn't even exist, and maintain it in a way that doesn't, that self-conscious definition is an undue regard with appearance. Why would we be overly concerned about how we appeared if we had any confidence that what was appearing was in fact reality and true? But promoting those images that appear to be who I am are very doubtful and risky because we're afraid of what everyone else thinks, because we're relying on them not seeing what we're doing to promote those images to give us the impression that we're actually promoting them well enough to be believed in. And why go to such an effort to promote something that we could simply say, yeah, I'm playing that role today. That's it. It isn't me. It isn't real. That's just a choice. I'm wearing this outfit. I'm playing this role. I've got this mask on, and that's what I'm doing. So what? Make of it what you will. I'm enjoying my day.
Mm-hmm.
We're perfectly free to do that. And yet in that other role, it seems as though our life depends on maintaining that bulletproof exterior where nobody penetrates it, nobody thinks contrary to what we're thinking, and we're constantly trying to manage the thought around us by only associating to people who think like we do and being completely at odds and offended by anyone who thinks that like we don't, and not realize that that's simply all a function of desperate thoughts attempting to make believe that what they're making believe in is true in reality, when they wouldn't have any doubt or defense if it was in fact truth and reality, because there is no reason to defend truth or reality, and none of us can do it, nor have we ever tried and been successful. There's no need for it.
It's like when you ask someone, so how are you doing? And they say, fantastic. It's like, how do you respond to that? Well, I'm not. I mean,
must be nice.
Well, and the part of
what's it like up there?
Part of going back to your embracing point is something that we suggested in the earlier discussions, maybe a year, 14 months ago or so, when our weekly discussion started, was to begin to embrace the wrong rather than think of it as something that you needed to stop. And most of the appearance that we're trying to maintain is the attempt to deny what's wrong as being wrong. So there's a lot of investment in trying to protect against being seen for being wrong. And if and when you begin to embrace the wrong, it begins to free you from the defense of what's wrong. And the embrace isn't the embracing of truth and reality, because this is different than what you brought up earlier, Everett, because there's no need to embrace truth and reality or what's happening, because it's happening. So now we're talking about embracing something that's obviously repulsive to us because it isn't true and it isn't real, and we're acting as though it is. And we're starting to actually just put our arms around it and say, wow, I created this. I can have it in a way that's friendly, as much as I can have it in the way that I think I need to deny it and pretend that my life depends on not being seen as doing it, and start to actually begin to say, this is of my own making. And if I can make peace with it, I can begin to dissolve it, and I can begin to have a relationship to it that allows me to pick or choose it, and allows me to see that I haven't even been doing anything that isn't any more than delusional. All of my defenses and defiance are admissions that I'm trying to maintain something that doesn't even exist, except for the defenses I pose as though it's at risk. Interesting thing that we would defend something that doesn't even exist and not notice that it's the defense of the thing we're using to justify its existence. There's nothing to defend in reality and truth. Our natural state has no need for defense. Nor do any of those other delusional things we create have any need for defense, except for our belief in them as being true and real, just like a lie is only a lie as long as it's not a wrong thought that's a lie. It's the thought that it's true and real that it's a lie. It's our defense of it, our thinking that we can hide it, that becomes the lie. And nothing is hidden because we wear that in blood, sweat, and tears. It's expressed through us. It's never hidden. The anxiety we have, the defenses we keep, the reactions that we use to protect against it are all evidence that we're trying to hide something that is not hidden at all. They're all revealing it naturally. And to see that is to start seeing that reactions are a really good guidance system. Same with something wrong, same with doubt, same with judgment and contempt and all that. It's a great chance to say, oh, I'm up to something here. If I feel contempt, I must be thinking something that's condemned. If I'm feeling offended, I must be defending something that doesn't exist. I must be protecting something that has no basis for somebody else's thought to be offensive. And I say, oh, you're rude. You're invading my space. No, they're not. They're just recognizing my limits, and I'm not happy to have them recognized because it admits that I'm doing something that's very limited. And I want to think of them as absolute rather than limited.
Yeah, what you said right now, that was probably one of the most powerful things I've experienced in a while was, I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to be shamed. I don't want to, come to find out that I've done these things. But when I started to come to terms that I'd created a lot of the things that were my reality and embrace them and just say, yeah, that I did that. It was liberating, because that's the only way I could start to say, okay, what now?
Well, and the what now too, Michael, is starting to say, I'm doing that to any degree that I'm still witnessing those things in others. Mm-hmm. And when I start seeing that what I'm seeing other people is, I think they're this way and I think they're that way, and I think I can't get through to them, and I think it's up to me to push through their resistance. It's the resistance I think they have that I can't push through because I continue to maintain it. And if the thing they're doing to defend has no basis, they're really not doing the thing any more than I'm doing it. And for me to think they're doing it and I need to fight through it is to confirm that they're doing it exactly the way I thought I was doing it, which shows once again I'm up to the same trick with them. I'm using them as an excuse to make believe that what they're doing is, oh, I used to do that, and I'm trying to help you see something, when in fact I'm doing it now to use them. So it's in the present that the life of the present is where life exists, and the possibility to ever change anything is always being present, because everything's already changing. Now the question is, what's the change we want to make out of it? Which goes back to Jackie's question. How do I be the change I want to see? Well, be as you are. And the expectations will dissolve, and all of a sudden the things will start happening in ways you couldn't have even imagined. And you'll start to recognize that natural intuitive state is actually happening in a way that we couldn't have predicted, and we don't need to predict, and we don't need to figure out, we don't need to get to the bottom of, and we don't need to understand. It's natural when we're acting in ways that are natural and accepting what we're doing. If I'm wrong and I just accept I'm wrong, it's a lot easier to be wrong when you accept you're wrong. It's a lot of fun. It's just me being wrong. And
yeah, you get to laugh at yourself.
I can go as far as I want, and I'm not condemned to it because I'm seeing that I'm doing it by choice, as I have been the whole time, but I'm not living in the delusion of thinking it's not a choice and I'm condemned to it. So one of our early participants hasn't come back when he got that. He came back 1 week to say, I've been struggling in my marriage for years. I started just saying what I was thinking. And for the first time in my experience with my wife, she respects me. He just said the things that were wrong in his mind, that he was constantly trying to avoid and trying to say the nice thing, the right thing. And he finally just started saying exactly what he was thinking. And he knew that it was wrong. He said, if it's wrong, say it. Get used to it. Why pretend you're not doing it if you're doing it? You're already impacting the person in the same negative way that you would if you spoke about it. And if you speak about it, at least they can laugh at what you're saying and say, that's ridiculous or that's wrong. At least you have a chance to engage around it and find out that it isn't as serious as you think it is when you keep it to yourself. So he came back once and said, oh my God, I never knew how fun it could be to be wrong. And she started appreciating me. And he's like, man, it's like I love this woman. And he'd struggled both in sobriety and otherwise. So those little glimmers are like taking links out of a chain that you think you're bound by, and start to see that when there's one link missing, the whole chain fails. There's nothing left to hold on to you, nothing. And the links are only the self-serving thoughts going around and around and around, desperately trying to maintain the thought. And if there's any desperation involved, the thought has no basis other than the thought that there's a thought worth considering. And there is nothing. That's why we feel empty. That's why we feel bored. We say we're bored with things and other people. Boredom is a witness to the numbness we're creating in our own experience. Why wouldn't we get bored if all of a sudden we were frozen? That would be a pretty boring state of existence because there'd be nothing, we wouldn't be feeling anything. Head to toe. What's boring is what we're doing that's boring.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing more or less. And if there's no adventure, we are on a very sad and tired journey that we've taken so many times. Nothing impresses us about it at all. And that is not life. That is an imposition of experience we create to justify making belief life is the problem, when it's offering us all possibility all the time without limitation, which is really what love is. And ultimately, the most attractive thing between people is a loving nature, which is the thing that we're bound by, not in a contemptful way or a condemn. You can't be bound by love when it's everything anyone could ever want.
So I love that you brought up love. Didn't mean to do that, but my interpretation of love is much different than my partner's. So how does one come to a mutual understanding? Because realistically, I think at the same time, when we use words like love and happiness, it's coming with an underlying understanding of what that word is or what it represents. But what I learned in our relationship is it meant something completely different.
Well, then it's probably not love. It's probably a social contract that comes with conditions and comes with expectations. But that's more about like than love. And my expectation is nobody struggles with love, or my understanding. Nobody struggles with love, but people struggle with what they like. And in relationships, it tends to be what we like and don't like that keep people either together or apart.
Got it.
So
I agree with
social contracts, we use the word love in ways that it's not designed, so that we've even renamed it unconditional love when love isn't conditional to begin with. That's like naming water wet and having to repeat it every time you say
water.
it. And it's wet water compared to the other type. There is no conditions in love. That's the point of it, is that it's unadulterated. It doesn't have conditions. It doesn't think. It doesn't give or take. It doesn't come or go. It's an absolute nature. So if we've already got that between us, we don't struggle with love. We struggle with definitions about what we think love should include. And generally what I've learned with my wife is that flowers seem to work really well in the like department. So we always have new flowers in the house, and there are things that she likes. And when I'm game to go with her in those things, she seems happier about those things. And I'm happy that she's happy. She likes pillows. She likes soft things. She likes beautiful things. She likes ceramics, and she likes investigating ceramicists and all that. And I'm always fascinated by the wonder that comes over her when she's seeing that stuff. I really appreciate it because she has incredible taste and has developed it as a result of looking at people who know what they're doing when it comes to ceramics. So those aren't things that, I could have hard positions about those things, but it wouldn't change what she likes. It would only change what I don't like. And if I'm the one causing the limits, then what I really don't like is what I'm doing. But here's something interesting too, getting back to the balancing thing. We always like what we don't like, which is an interesting balance, because there's no reason we would not like something if we didn't like not liking it.
Did you say that again?
You like not what you don't like. You like not liking what you don't like.
Always. We have an attachment to it. So if we think it's one thing and not the other, again, we lose focus and don't see that, in the whole opposites conversation on the podcast, the opposites conversation talks about the fact that things are not opposite. They're just extreme positions held by common ground. So good is a function of bad. So somebody that says, I'm only going to be good, the man who says his daughter never has negative thoughts, must not be having thoughts at all, because good thoughts are always attached to bad thoughts. and good is the basis of bad. These judgments are they're bound to one another. Something absolute doesn't have extremes because it doesn't have bounds. So it doesn't have the chance to appear opposite. So whatever is opposite, like left is left only to right. You wouldn't know it's left if there was no right. You wouldn't know what's up if there was no down. You wouldn't know what's in if there was no out. Those things work together. And again, it's like thinking of all things that change collectively and saying, well, at least the one thing that doesn't change about all things changing is that everything's always changing.
Yeah.
So when you see it in total, it all of a sudden becomes an absolute view rather than one that's dissected and bisected and intersected by all these transitions that we make and distinctions that we cause. And words are a great way of doing that. You know, if you're battling over definition of words, you're losing the fact that the words aren't identifying the thing. They're simply referencing the thing. And if we didn't have some knowing of that thing, the words would never add up to that thing because that thing already adds up to whatever it is. So in terms of love, when you know that the basis of your existence with her is love, there's nothing that can ever break that. Nothing that can ever take that apart. But the sad thing sometimes to a partner is to realize that that's also true with everybody else and everything else. And yet the good thing is it's true for them too. And that means the world that's out there that could seem hostile really isn't any more hostile than we think it is and think it can be, and feed into that fuel and that grid of electricity and nervousness and guilt and shame that comes with those thoughts when we think they're true, rather than just simply suppositions, impositions, illusions that we create and make believe are true.
My production company is called Organic Polyester, and people laugh like, ha ha ha, you know. The mantra is that we like to explore the beauty and ugliness and the ugliness and beauty, because there's a point of, I mean, both of them are judgments, but there's a point of connection. And that area where it's blurry, you know, where what is beauty, what is ugliness, what is good, what is bad, that's a fascinating place. I think that's a human struggle. You know,
well, they're just choices, though. When you begin to just see that you're making choices, they're very easy to change, and they're much more flexible than we think they are when we think they're true and they define us. And that's just who I am. You know, you hear people say, well, that's just who I am. Oh, really? Is it? Could you be a little more insistent about that? If it was just who you are, why would you fight? It would just be who you are. You wouldn't even think about it. You wouldn't even be arguing over it. You know, people come to me and say, I'm looking for my true self. And I say, do the world a fucking favor and stop. If it's true, how could it not be true now? How could you not be that thing? And how, if you think it's false and you're looking from false eyes, do you think you're going to find that truth? Doesn't that seem a little awkward and a little odd?
Well, it sounds like the whole problem is the fact that you're searching when you are.
Yes.
This is your true self. And most likely, if you're in distress, because it's your true self revealing itself. It's not revealing itself because it's there to begin with. And then you need to attend to or pay closer attention to what is bringing you that distress.
Well, you don't need to, but if you begin simply admitting that the distress is always an indication of managing something that's wrong and making believe it's right, it just starts to, you can but you can very quickly begin to see that if the elementary issues that you're dealing with are causing thousands of the same type of problems with different faces, you can start seeing the elementary issue that you're doing is simply lying about something, and lying is always claiming that something that isn't true is true. That's all that it is. and start to say, I'm lying. Now, that doesn't make us liars to lie. It makes us acting out in ways that are lies. Our actions don't define us. They define what we're thinking. And if our thinking is who we are, then there would be no ego in thought. Our thinking is something we do. It's not something we are. It's something we have. It's not something we have to do. We think, but we aren't bound to any of the content of thought that we choose. Those are choices. Choices can all be unchosen. Things that can't be chosen aren't things that can't be unchosen because they aren't choices. They're conditions, they're states. So anything we choose that we struggle with, we can unchoose. And the question is, if we can make it worse, doesn't that suggest we can always make it better?
Yep.
And if we can make it worse and simply not make it worse by not having a relationship to it that's in opposition to it, where we need to get better to balance it, we can start just simply recognizing that to maintain delusion at all is the source of all my problems. And when I start seeing that as the context, I begin to realize that the only thing I ever struggle with is delusional. And then when I start saying I'm up to something, I realize, yeah, I'm up to making believe that something that doesn't even exist is true. Now that's laughable when I'm looking at it with any degree of perspective, and it's something to kill myself over if I think it's true. And why do I want to kill myself? Because I want to blame something other than what I'm doing is the cause, because it seems inescapable. It seems impossible to escape. What's the impossibility? My chronic, constant thinking that it's right and true. That's what's impossible. It isn't impossible to let go of. It's impossible to let go of as long as I continue to maintain it. And that really describes addiction. It's nothing more than a thought that it's impossible to do, and that because the withdrawal symptoms and all those things are difficult, that I can't do it. When in fact, many bodies have more than survived the withdrawal symptoms. And the withdrawal symptoms from obsessive thinking is starting to see the amount that we've been doing that's wrong. And withdrawing means we're gaining perspective rather than being face first into it where we have no vision. We start to withdraw and start to pull back and start to realize that we actually have had perspective, because the thing that's been watching and knew that something was wrong, the thing that gave us the clarity about what was wrong, was the observing eye that knows peace and wholeness and completeness and is absolute in that regard and is the basis for our understanding what's wrong in thought. That's the eye that's really witnessing what's happening. That's the observer ultimately. And the withdrawal is starting to see, wow, I have been for decades causing problems and creating situations to help justify and blaming other people and blaming states and countries and types of people and all kinds of things I've used as excuses to justify my own inability to face what I'm doing honestly.
I walked Oliver late after work, and as I came out of our kind of like alley thing, because I come out the back door of our building, I heard someone crying. It was like in a movie, and this is really late at night. It's dark, and I walked when I rounded our building. There was a woman in the doorway, lying on her back. She was homeless, and she was just bawling. And it was like, I don't know, 1 o'clock in the morning, 1:30 in the morning, just lying there bawling. And it's really we see tons and tons of homeless all the time, but I've never seen someone in such distress. And she'd made a little nook in this, so it seemed as if I wrote the script, it was like something that she was thinking about. It wasn't like something that just happened, but maybe it did. I don't know. But I just I really empathized with her. I mean, it just seemed like I wanted to ask her, what are you crying? What's upsetting you so much? And I felt I don't know, Jack, I think Jack, you're saying, well, you should have, and I didn't. And I
tend to say should.
I'm sorry?
I tend to say can, not should.
Uh-huh. One side of me wanted to, and then the other side of me, when I'm brutally honest, every time I say Jack's in my head, well, why does honesty have to be brutal?
It isn't.
I didn't want to get sucked into. I didn't want to get sucked into her. My fear was being pulled into her life, into the potential insanity. And at the same time, I was moved and concerned about her crying. And then I just think about what type of mental prison that she must be in. And then how many times I haven't been homeless in a doorway crying like that. I've been in a very comfortable setting, feeling similar, and how privileged I was to be dealing with my issues in the way I was when we first met. For instance, I was in a very dark place. I still had a expensive car. I had a beautiful apartment, and I felt as if everything, my whole life, was coming to an end, and I wasn't happy about how it was coming to an end. And
let's take that term for a minute. What was coming to an end was the life you thought you had, because you were starting to see that there was no life in it. And it's interesting that we, again, term it as, I thought my life was coming to an end, as though it wasn't, when in fact you really believed that the confines of all those sick things you'd been doing was your life. And it shows how we think thought is in fact the source of life. And it's simply the functional capacity a body has to consider things and act on those things. That's what it's designed to do. That's what thinking's designed to do.
So would you say that it was an accurate assessment when I felt that way, that
Yes.
my life was coming to an end, but not the life necessarily that, it was.
It's not actually your life.
Right.
It was your opinion of what life was.
Yeah. That's cool. That's really cool. That's really interesting.
Do you see, though, Everett, how we think of it in universal terms rather than specific to the limited world we think we're creating within thought? We say it in those terms that seem as though it's so true as to really be our life, and then not realize we're just referencing the life we think we have.
It's like the Russian doll again.
So here's the difference. As you begin witnessing those feelings you're having and see that they're telling you the truth accurately about what you're thinking, and not the truth about the world and people and everybody else and all things and what you're doing and who you are, you'll start saying, thanks for the information. This is an incredible guidance system I have. This is like my GPS correcting me when I don't make the turn it's telling me to make, and it takes a minute to adjust, and it recalibrates and say, hey, make a U-turn at the next place. If you want to get where you're going, make that U-turn, make an adjustment. Thank you. Rather than, fuck you. What do you mean turn around, asshole? You didn't have me turn at the first thing? And all of a sudden realize that that reactiveness is actually protecting something that has no basis. And we're so ashamed of it that we feel guilt and shame. Those are accurate assessments. So the turn here is saying, if what I'm feeling is actually an accurate assessment of my thinking, and I've been thinking what I've been feeling is who I am and what I am, I've been thinking my thoughts is all that I am. and start to see that the lie of thinking is making believe it is everything rather than simply something we do. It's a functional capacity of a body. And what's interesting is people who don't think, people who are in comas, their body continues to work. Why? Because we have a knowing nature that exceeds our thinking. And we have it even within our body, and don't want to pay attention to the fact that most of the things that are most critical to us to continue the existence we're having, our heart beating, the blood pumping, vitamins, minerals.
Yeah.
Huh?
If they're out of our control. I mean, we're not controlling that.
And you know what's interesting is we're not worried about them. We're not. I'm not thinking has 2 quarts of blood pumped itself down to the right. But here's what I worry about is how is stress affecting my body? I could be sick. I start worrying about sickness in relation to what I'm doing by stressing my body and not admitting it's what I'm doing that's causing the stress to think about the thing that's actually undermining my health. Again, thinking about my body as some strange disease is going to come along rather than begin to recognize that I'm undermining the capacity of my body to act. Health is natural. Disease is unnatural. In society today, disease has become so natural that anything that's healthy seems like a miracle and some rare occurrence. It's not the case.
Just like also not drinking. What's wrong with you? Why don't you drink?
Well, and think about how long people are able to drink and do drugs and still survive. The pretty good evidence that we've got a working system that's really durable. It's really built to last. It's really built to overcome the petty things that we worry about, but we're worrying accurately about what we're doing because we know that we're not paying attention to the cause of what's creating the effects we know that can be created as a result. We're honestly assessing that. Your little window that you just saw there and seeing that is starting to see that the things we're feeling are actually accurate assessments of what we're thinking. And if you begin to assign them correctly and accurately to what they belong to, feeling becomes the flip side of a coin. And I've had some contention over this, and some people say that feelings come first, but if that's the case, then treating feelings would be the solution and drinking would not be a problem. Alcoholism would be actually curing the problem by drinking and changing the feelings. So I would
thinking
suggest,
comes first.
Well, I believe they're simultaneous, but one causes the effect. Cause and effect are simultaneous. The eventual effect that becomes obvious when we start paying attention and realize, oh, I was sick for 9 years and didn't pay any attention to it, and the cavity now is turned into a toxic jaw problem because it's gotten into the roots of my jaw, and all of a sudden it isn't that problem didn't start when it started and didn't exist the whole time. It's that it took that long for me to finally concede something's wrong, which shows how willing I am to be in denial over what's happening to allow things to get to those kind of conditions and finally say, oh, now it's really wrong. I just realized it. No. You didn't just realize it. You just stopped denying that it was hurting, and you stopped using Ambisol and painkillers and all kinds of other things to treat the symptom and make believe because you were treating the symptom, you were better. And we do it without having to use pharmaceuticals and drugs because we have a chemical cocktail in our brains that gets set off when we pose an emergency to our body, and it starts functioning like adrenaline does when we get hurt seriously. And all of a sudden we know that we're hurting, but we just don't feel the pain the way that we would normally feel the pain if we were fully aware of it. The adrenaline kind of steps in and takes over a little bit so we can maintain some degree of alertness.
To touch on what Everett was sharing, I definitely can say that I relate to that wanting like I just wanted my life to end. I didn't want to harm myself. I never got to that point. But I just was like perpetually thinking about like my life needs to end. This life needs to end. And it was this obsessive idea. And I can say now I haven't had that thought since I made the changes and since I've adjusted and came to terms with some of those things. So when you just brought it up, it reminded me like, yeah, I don't know where those thoughts went, but I think it was like what Jack just said. I needed that version to end. It just needed to stop.
Well, but in relation to what Everett just saw, those thoughts were asking you to stop doing what you were doing to cause the impression that you had a life worth ending. And by thinking it wasn't your thinking and it was a condition that you had that was a curse and happening to you rather than being caused by you, gave you the impression that it was your whole life rather than the life form of thoughts. It's the thought life we're struggling with. And thoughts don't really have any life, by the way, that we don't give them. They're chosen. Those thoughts aren't full of content because nothing happened and somebody filled our brain with thoughts. They're chosen. If we can unchoose them, we've chosen them. If we can choose them, we can unchoose them. And that idea is what leads to, they often say suicide kills the wrong person, because the person we're struggling with is the one we think we are, not the actual one we are. And so there's addiction. All addictions are slow forms of suicide. All of them, all compulsions. Nobody's ever addicted to broccoli or asparagus. We're never addicted to things that are good for us for a reason, because we're using it as an excuse to try and kill the thing we're not willing to stop creating in our thoughts. So we're trying to escape the thing we create in a thought by doing something outside of us and use the idea that we're not doing it to further the idea we're not doing it, so we can blame alcohol, drugs, food, anything else, people, places, things. The world's a problem. God doesn't love me. I'm disconnected from a source that's impossible to disconnect from. And I'm considering, while I'm unwilling to look at nothing being possible, I'm willing to look at the one thing that's impossible as being the sole problem. I can be disconnected from a God or a source that's absolute. Isn't that interesting? And isn't that insane to look at in any accurate form, in any proportionate perspective?
It's wild. It is. It's wild because it's.
Yeah.
I mean, another thing that I just thought of is, Anna always refers to herself as 3.0. And we joke that 2.0 was really fun, but she needed to go. She was that version, that life that was lived. I needed to end, but I never correlated the two with my thoughts that, Everett just brought up. And I appreciate that, because that's the difference in how we manage and how we think about certain things. My version was not to create a new version. My version was to end it, stop it, just be done with it. But in retrospect, it was just the habits that I wanted to put an end to.
Here's something that's both can sound contemptful and difficult in relation to what you're saying, Michael, is that the potential to create obsessive thoughts is always available to us because we're free to do it. But the interest in doing it chronically begins to dissipate when we begin admitting what we're doing honestly and see it accurately. And the accuracy is seeing that what we're doing in thought doesn't create any reality at all. It just creates an impression of something that's real. And the only reason it feels real is because it hurts. And hurt is a guidance system to tell us what's wrong, not what's real. And the ego uses pain to claim it's right and real, which is what we're trying to put ourselves out of the misery of experiencing when we talk about trying to kill ourselves and talk about trying to change our experience to not feel those desperate things that we're feeling. Rather than stopping it, we're still just treating the symptom by thinking it's about feeling better. And when we're better, say we're not drinking, we're not doing the most primary compulsion, and we've recovered from it, and there are all kinds of programs available for all the different symptoms. And if they haven't been created and the symptom exists, they're being created as we're talking. People are recognizing that these things we can be freed from them by using the same steps that alcoholics and drug addicts and food, sex, alcoholic, sex addicts, gambler, all of it. It's all the same thing. They're different modifications based on the experience of people, but the basic precept is all the same. The basic concept is all the same. Relieving ourselves of those obsessive, compulsive behaviors is starting to see the possibility of thinking obsessively is always available. It isn't something we chase away and get rid of and stop once and forever. We're never going to do it again. It's the seeing that we can create it and we can uncreate it as quickly as we create it. That isn't contempt at all. That's just skill. That's just versatility. That's just flexibility. That's just capacity being expressed. We're not condemned to it. We're neutral to it. We can take it or leave it. We can pursue it as long as we want. And if we're actors pursuing an act, we get paid for well. Right? That's what actors do. And we applaud actors. We call them stars, like they're in the universe. They're up in the skies. They're in heaven. Because we appreciate that. And yet when we do it to ourselves and make believe it's who we are, we feel depreciated and have a diminished capacity and all the things that go with it. And it isn't to suggest it goes away. It's to start to see clearly that we can make something up all the time. And often when we react to things that we get overwhelmed by, we start doing things that are more defensive than they are protective. And when we start defending things that cause the problem to get worse, we're starting to defend the threat that we're maintaining that's getting worse. And we're going to need to constantly defend it rather than recognize it and come to terms with it. And the coming to terms is beginning to recognize that we can interact with exactly what's going on with in any way productive rather than destructive and defensive and protective. We can take it all on. We're absolutely capable. It's just a function of doing it and choosing to face what's happening. If we can face what we're doing internally, we can start the world becomes easy to face. Because all we've ever struggled with essentially is what we thought of it, not what it was. And the possibility begins more obvious. And the fact is, most things always go better than we expect when we start facing them honestly. Mm-hmm. Where in the past, everything always went worse than we expected because we were hoping in vain that all the shit we were doing wouldn't come true when in fact we were causing the problems and ignoring that we were causing them. Of course they were going to get worse.
Like paying bills. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Letting them add up.
They don't seem to not be past due when you put them in a drawer. Right? Those people don't tend to not call. So when people are afraid they're going to call, they don't have to be afraid. Expect it. They're calling. Ignore the problem, and you're going to get a knock on the door. You're going to get a call. And the call in our body is something that ends up worse than it needs to be if we were attending to things properly.
Sure. They compound.
Not only that,
and then it's like
we create them. Our thoughts, our toxic thoughts will create toxic problems in our body to confirm that it's not us as an excuse that we use. We create it, manifest it to justify we don't have anything to do with it.
For some strange reason, you really blew me away with the for some strange reason, this is not strange, Everett. You really blew me away with the coma metaphor. Because really, when you think about it, our body, like when you're in a coma, it's like all of a sudden you become a part of nature. Well, we are a part of nature, but it's like you're seeing
all of a sudden.
It's like
all of a sudden,
in my head. Jack, get out. No,
but Everett, you're catching yourself by watching and starting to say, "Wow, we have wrapped as a society, as a human species, we have wrapped this presumed truth into our language to the point that we don't even look at what we're saying and not even notice what we're saying and how ridiculous it is." And yet it seems so common as to, well, everybody else is doing it. Well, if we're excusing ourselves by using everybody else who's wrong, that still can't be right. Why would we make believe because everybody else is doing something wrong that we must be right? That's another sick twist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But the whole I know, right?
What was that, Michael?
Giving me permission to finish my thought. It's that the coma thing, like once you're in a coma, you really become, there it goes again. But it's like you're a tree, just a part of the earth. And you're just living. And then so many people attach themselves to their physical existence. Like, I am this body. But so where are you when you're in a coma? Understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Wherever you are.
Mm-hmm. Right. But I'm not talking about your body,
Understand.
Jack. I'm talking about
I understand, but that being nature isn't in a place. It isn't in, it's just wherever it is, it is. It just, it doesn't seem to happen coincidentally because we're there. It's always there. And when we acknowledge it, we notice it. And when we pretend it's not there, we think we don't notice it. It doesn't go away. It's always there. So my sense is that present state isn't a function of time and space. It's a function of absolute. It's that nature we talk about as being what precedes and exceeds the human experience and the universe and all that stuff. It's something absolute, that it's infinite. It's something that if you consider infinite, it can't have bounds. And what's interesting about it, Stephen Hawking said, he said that in an infinite universe, everyone's at the center. And think about the difference between self-centeredness and a realm where everybody's at the center. All of a sudden, we share the same common nature rather than thinking of it as something that's due me at your expense, when I'm at the center and no one else is. And self-centered thinking gives me the impression I'm divided from something that's indivisible. I'm apart from something I can't be apart from. So the inclusiveness, when you consider things in absolute terms, we begin to see if everybody's at the center, we're all even. There is no odds in even. And there is no getting even in being at odds.
Now you're showing off.
At all. But think about the opposites. You start seeing that this stuff, when you think about, like, you're just catching yourself saying things and realizing, using me as an excuse because I might correct you, but you're starting to see it and say, oh, that doesn't make any sense. Because the perspective is always there. We're just not always exercising it. We're not always allowing that flexibility to express ourselves. We're not always reading the body signs. And my term for that is functional literacy. We're not always reading functionally our body language and the posted signs that it's giving us. And when we're lying about it and want to maintain the lie, we always see the feelings that are accurate assessments of what we're thinking as something other than what we're thinking. So we think it's who we are, which is why we attach, because when we think our thoughts are who we are, we immediately, because the body's the producer of thoughts, we immediately think who we are is our body. And all we are is our body. And our life is at risk based on our body's health. And that isn't true. Life isn't at risk at all based on life forms. Life is the possibility of life forms. Life isn't at risk. Life provides life forms. Life forms transform all the time. All the time. Deepak Chopra talked about our body having new cells every 7 years. I don't hear anybody saying, it's 6 years and my body's about to change. And it's nature. It just does what it does. Nobody's complaining and thinking about it. The fear we create, the self-centered fear we create, the self-imposed, self-induced, self-centered state is all an imposition of what we're doing in thought only. There's nothing out there doing it to us. There's nothing condemning us to it but our own maintenance of it. Our own insistence to resist, to create pressure that persists. And that's depressing. And the depression, again, if you think of it in terms of thought, is accurate. Because we're bearing a weight that's impossible to bear because it doesn't even exist. We think it's an unbearable weight because it's impossible to bear, but the fact is it doesn't even exist, and we're manifesting the impression that it does, so we bear this weight. That's pretty fucking sick. That we could do that to ourselves and make believe it's true for the sake of making believe it's up to me and you to do, and then think the thing I need to do is think my way out of the problem rather than begin to see it's the thinking that got me here I'm not going to be able to use to resolve it, ever. And start to realize that if it's delusional, I haven't even been doing the thing I thought I was doing the whole time, and certainly that would mean right now I'm not doing it either. You know, there's that old saying in AA is, we may all be here, but we're not all there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in thinking about not being where we are, you can't be there if you're not here. There is no there. There is no then. Those are all just concepts of thought. There's things we think about in terms of our history and our memory. But they're not true and real. They're just like the movies always say based on a true story. Not actually a true story, because true stories is somewhat of an oxymoron, because to tell a story is always to tell something about that's not happening, and to contain all that's happening in any story would be to be in the moment only to be able to tell that story. And then that story wouldn't need to be told because there's no narrative to go with everything that's happening. It just is happening.
I think that's something you just brought up. AA reminded me, I've never been to an AA group. And that's the one reason I think the group that you have here is so powerful, because it's touching on something that I think doesn't have a stigma with it. When you talk about things like AA, a lot of people are just like, nope, not my group, not my demographic. Like myself, I'm like, I don't think I have that. It's not my people. But then coming into this space and listening to your message and listening to the things that we are talking about, it's hitting home for me, because I didn't have an interpretation. I don't have these preconceived notions. I just came in a little more willingly. But like Everett said, it's something I was also looking for. But I think it's valuable to mention that, because there can be presumptions that people have in their mind. And I think what we're talking about here is just those things. Like, think about that presumption you have. Think about the things that are going on in your mind. Think about, have that dialogue in a healthy manner, which is what happens. And I feel like we have those 12 people you're referring to on Sunday. I feel like I'm talking to my mind at times, like they're all different representations. And I'm able to sit here and go, well, I'm not alone, which is great, because I'm usually alone in my mind, having all these journeys and paths, because our minds are capable of that. But being in this space to have that healthy dialogue helps a lot.
Even in that, Michael, you're thinking you're alone, but you're not alone. And as you begin to apply the concept that the absolute can't be interrupted and just begin to use it, you'll start to see the thinking you do that gives you the impression that you're alone is just thinking you're alone. And that isn't truth. It's just a conclusion that a thought, we can make conclusions and thoughts that seem true to the thought that we're holding, but that's what self-centered thought is. Truth doesn't need to be held, and it doesn't need to be maintained. It just is what it is. It just is its own. It is what it is, and it's the basis of our existence. So one thing you're pointing out, though, is that 12-step programs are not the sum total of the solution, but they offer options and introductions to people to free themselves from compulsions. And there's 100+ of them dealing with all different compulsions. So it's an easy route that's been proven by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, to begin to take apart the things that seem impossible within a group of people that have already witnessed the possibility. And that transition is a big difference. Now, you're making a point that Sturgis made this last Sunday, and we're going to make in a second amendment to the introduction to the mod, to the mental obsession discussion. And that is that if this is a human problem, it isn't limited to any organization or any specific compulsion. It's inclusive of all compulsions and all reactive behaviors and all impulsive behaviors, because they would all be indications of a defense against something that's self-inflicted. And if you're defending against something you're doing, the question is, why not just stop doing it? Why are we so prone to defend against it? And my suggestion is because we take it seriously enough to make believe it's true and real. And that's the only thing that keeps it going. But your clarity, when Everett talked to you, which is why the three of us are in this conversation for this trilogy that we're just coming to an end of, you realized that the suffering and the issues you had weren't the drinking, because you were able to stop that. So I would say in alcoholic terms, you're not an alcoholic, but you clearly suffered from the mental conditions that you related to enough to come and listen, and then begin to be open enough to begin to look and see that maybe you were doing the same thing everybody else was doing in ways that you thought were unique to you, but weren't unique at all when you started seeing so many other people admitting the exact same thing. And that's the idea of context, rather than the content where you're filling it with the little bits and pieces of story, and realizing if we're all doing the same thing and we all just start looking at it in the same way, all of the little variations of stories we use to individuate us and give us a sense of being alone and separate and possibly alone which we can't be alone if we're intermingled and intertwined and interconnected synchronistically with all living things and all inanimate things. We can't possibly be alone, but we can think we are. And when we're thinking thoughts with no substance, we are feeling alone because the thought has no basis. And again, we're thinking about something with no basis. And so what do we feel? We have no basis. That's a big leap to conclude it's who we are rather than simply something we're doing. It's like waving your hand in the air 24 hours a day and saying, I can't write anymore. That would seem absurd. And yet it's exactly what we do by making believe that somehow if we keep thinking about something that isn't true, we're going to somehow make it true. And if we keep doing it, that's the answer, rather than simply stop and realizing we're already true. We're already real. We already have a basis of existence that is absolutely fundamental. So we don't need to fund a mental condition to prove it. Anyway, I love you guys, and this has been, profound, and I value the potential to witness others involved in this conversation. And it is an awesome, literally, experience, because the adventure is to realize that if we can do it, everyone can do it. And if we're doing it, everyone is doing it, while they may not think they're doing it. And the potential to allow that thinking to begin to have some bursts in the bubble is to simply talk about it and to simply allow people to witness that, and then have that choice in themselves as to whether or not they want to consider it, and consider that maybe it's true rather than what they think is true is all there is. And it really comes down to that. It's so simple that it's the easiest thing to complicate is something simple. So think about a couple questions for our next incoming. I think it may be Santiago and Nick, and it may be Philip and someone yet.
Oh, that's going to be great.
Tune in next
Nice.
week.
Santiago just got back from a month in Spain and spent time at the tennis clinic of Nadal. So he was thrilled he missed our group session yesterday and stayed up all night to watch Nadal in Australia win, and apparently did what nobody had ever done in that class, and was just agog with it, but tired by morning. So what are your questions? Give me a couple for the next trilogy.
Trying to remember. I did have one. I can't remember it at the moment. It was relating to picking a path. I was reading something and it talked about movies, and Everett, you might like this, but it talked about how we're capable of watching movies, and we're capable of really, depending on the movie, connecting with every character. You can connect with the hero, you can connect with the villain, you can always identify with one of them. And I think at times, because of the way our thoughts work, we go through life that way, which is kind of it's crippling, because at the same time, you're not able to really focus and hone on who it is you are or would like to be, and picking a single path and excelling at whatever that path is going to be the outcome. Because in the back of your mind, as in Anthony did yesterday, he's like, oh man, it'd be really nice to be Nadal. I wish I would have gone to play tennis. And it's like, you just go down this road. It's like, it's one thing to think about like what that life would be like, but then to really berate yourself because you didn't choose it, as if it was even an option. So like, it's how do you find your path and things that are valuable to you, and being able to stick with that.
Well, I would ask, how can you lose it?
Well, you lose it in thought. You lose it in thinking all of these things and paths that others chose that all of a sudden you should have done too. Because they did it. Why didn't I do it?
You think you lose it in thought.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're losing is what you're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So you're always on the path. Question is, if we're thinking we're not, what are we going to do? Probably the wrong thing. or more wrong than express that intuitive sense. Ultimately, we have an intuitive sense. Intuition is knowledge beyond reason. It means there's no reason for it at all. So as a witness of the present, the knowing nature becomes obvious when we're not preoccupied thinking about what we should or shouldn't be doing. Because the thinking will automatically know what to do, just like it does when we really face something that's fear and threatening. But it isn't to discount the question, Michael. I just point to the more, to me, obvious aspect of it and realize that the path is always where our feet are. And the choice of that direction is always what our choices are. Our feet never go anywhere on their own. They follow our thoughts. And our thoughts always have an expectation of where they're going to get. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's thinking that we're only going to get exactly what we expect that causes pain in that journey, rather than allowing what happens to happen, because you know what? What's happening is happening. And it's happening right now that way.
But you have to participate in the journey. Sitting on the couch isn't going to get you be able to figure out or meet what really stimulates you. I think in life I think the currency of life is love. But you've got to participate, and you have to participate in life. And then of course you'll come across, you'll have obstacles in your path, which may take the form of other people's opinions, or it might be there might be physical handicaps. There are lots of different obstacles, but you have to participate in terms of trying to not overcome the obstacle, but to persevere in order to experience what resonates with you. You know, sometimes the biggest obstacles are the biggest blessings. And
sitting on the couch might be the resonance for the person who sits on the couch. I mean, the idea that we have to do anything is the idea that we're condemned to do that thing, and that if we don't do that thing, we're condemned. And the freedom in choosing is starting to see that there is no condemnation in love. And by beginning to choose freely, we begin to realize we can choose right and wrong, and we can correct what's wrong, and we could sit on the couch for the rest of all time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Many people do it. There's many monks that sit in caves and they commit themselves to that silence and that peace.
What I meant though, was
I wouldn't have a couch to sit on if I sat around all the time.
But I use that as a metaphor for drugs and alcohol, like medicating ourselves in terms of like pressing the pause button.
But we're free to do that. We're as free to do it as we are to not do it. And the freedom comes in starting to see the neutrality to the conditions that we think are superimposed on us, when it's only the super ego and these ideas of the ego being bigger than who we are and who we are that are creating that imposition or that sense of imposition.
Yeah, and everything we're talking about is exactly that. How do you find that path? How do you find your direction and be true with that?
But you don't wonder about where it is, and you begin to do everything that is you begin to confront what's happening as it's happening, and you will see that you gain a clarity that has a knowing nature to it that can't be predicted and presumed, but all of a sudden becomes automatic in the functioning you do, just like the way we instinctively know to get out of the way of a car when we finally notice it's coming. We don't sit around and think a lot. And that nature is obvious to us when it comes to fear, but we seem to be oblivious to it when it comes to just simply expressing that simple peace and allowing our steps to be guided by that peace rather than the fear that's created by the imposition of thoughts that we constantly maintain and think we need to overcome. There's no overcoming the absolute. There's only expressing it. And the only thing to overcome is the stuff that we think can come and go, which are the thoughts we have. So what would your question be in relation to that, Everett? So you're really saying, Michael, how do we stay on the path?
Yeah.
Which was kind of Everett's question last time. How to stay in the zone. All questions lead to the same place. So
Where is that?
here, now. Only place we've ever been, only place we can be.
Well, it really kind of not dovetails, it circles right back to where we started even before we started recording, and that is what you said about it's kind of like turning my thinking inside out, where I'm concerned about maintaining a point of view or a state of mind of keeping one open for open possibilities rather than focusing on the obstacles or almost creating the obstacles by thinking about the obstacles rather than focusing on the endless possibilities of what one can achieve, which really almost sounds like looking at the glass half full as half empty.
It sounds to me like contraction or expansion.
Yeah.
Contraction always comes to a point and expansion never ends.
Exactly.
So those are directions we can choose. And self-centered thought, I would say, is attempting to make a point that can never be made. So it constantly focuses on repetition and all that. So I'll put that down for now, and you can develop it. If you change it, you let me know, and I'll update the site. I love you guys, and I appreciate this greatly. And I'm glad to be in a world with people who are interacting on a level that is curious enough to be curious and expansive enough to expand and to consider and to continue to contemplate in an awakened state rather than solely when we close our eyes and are in a perfectly peaceful environment and feel better as a result of it. The beginning of interacting on these precepts and this basis, this premise, this absolute nature is the beginning to see that we're always in an awakened state of meditation, and we just aren't very good at recognizing the bonus and benefits of it and the learning from it when we're making believe that what we need to do is avoid it and get over it and away from it because we feel so shameful and guilty for doing it. Big difference. Becomes an educational process of human capacity and expressing that capacity rather than human diminishment and an attempt to prove that a diminished state of capacity is the best thing we can do. And, oh, well, that's just life. That's a pretty sick version of life. So I appreciate the health and the wealth of insight and knowledge and the abundance in terms of concept. And I wish you, not even wish, I offer that is the natural state that you are always in, that we are always in, as we take those moments we're standing in the face of and begin to notice how quickly those foolish thoughts rush in. We can also say, okay, well, that's one way of looking at it. That's a thought. And start to say, what's next? I can think again. What else? What else might be bigger than that? What else could be? And isn't all possibility always bigger than anything I can consider? And start to just literally remind the thoughts that this mind that we know is actually capable of being expressed through the brain that we often don't want to admit we know. Love you guys.
Love you.
Love you two gentlemen very much. Really appreciate the last couple of weeks. They've been amazing.
Profound. What are you doing there, Jack?
Trying to find the end.
Let us know where it is.
I mean, of the recording. There is no end otherwise.
It's limitless. Haven't you learned anything, Michael?
I'm dealing now with Zoom's limits.